Okay, look. So today's lesson is about Web API. So to start with, we're going to start a new project, a new Web API project, file, new project. And this time we're going to choose, let me save this somewhere. And I'll call it Web API journey. Okay? This time we're going to be choosing this template, the Web API template. Good. So what do we get out of this template? Let's run it and see. Okay, so you will see a template, and as we don't have registration, we don't have login here. This is because this is an API. When you deal with APIs, you don't log in through an interface. You log in by making RESTful requests. But you can see this one here. And this shows us some of the services that are built into the template. So we have actually two controllers and two services really. There is this account that involves registration, login, because we're going to log in through a service. We're going to register a user through a service. At the moment, there are no users here, and you can't create a user through the interface. You have to do that through the service. And then there's like a hello world kind of service called the values service. Now, if I want to get to the values service, it tells me how I can get to it. To get to the values, to see all the records that belong to this values service, I'd have to go API values. So let's try that. So if I go here and I type in API values, it comes up with this error. So you can guess why we have this error. Probably in the code, they've put the authorize annotation. Let's get rid of that. So where is that code? It's nothing but a controller. So here it is, the values controller. Okay? Let's have a look at it. First thing is, we have this authorize annotation. I'm going to get rid of that. And you have a bunch of methods. The methods, the rules with these methods is that the RESTful services, they follow the 4 verbs that match to the CRUD operations. And they are, let's open up Notepad here. So if you're, I'll change the font first. If you're dealing, say, with a create or add situation, the appropriate verb for that is post. If you're dealing with an update situation with your data, the appropriate verb for that is put. If you're going to retrieve data, the appropriate method is get. And if you're going to delete data, the appropriate method for that, or the verb for that, is delete. Okay? So let's close this. And let's look at the code here. So we have get. The rule is that if you have a method that starts with the word get, then it will respond to the get verb. So this is a get and this is a get. Let us change this. Like if I, first of all, let's run it. Now that I deleted the authorize annotation, I think we can run it. So let's go in here and refresh this. So here you can see that it returned something. And I can also, according to this other method, the get method, which takes one argument, which is a number, I can actually try that by passing /3. Okay, I'm just passing a /3, and let's see what comes back. We get one item. Going back to the controller, the rule is that if the method starts with the word get, it responds to the get method. So let us change this to say get every thing. Okay, and maybe change the data to Jack and Jill. And for this one, let's say get one thing, and change the data to went up the hill. Let's compile. Okay, and then let's run. Let's refresh this. So if I refresh this, yeah, so now you get went up the hill for values on 3. Let's try just values to get all the collection, and you'll see it gave us Jack and Jill. So lesson learned, the method name has to start with get if it's supposed to respond to the get verb. And that's true of all the other action methods. Here we have the post that responds to the post method, the put that responds to the put method, and you have the delete. Okay? Now, let us add some more intelligence to this, to the application, and let it go against a database. So we will get it to go against the Northwind database. I'm going to add a new folder here for the Northwind database. And to this, I will add a new item and do the connection to SQL Server. So I'll change this to Northwind model. Select database first, and I'll add a new connection here. For the server name, I'll enter this. And I'm going to choose SQL Server Authentication. Save the password. We choose the Northwind database. Now, just for our purposes, I'm going to choose the categories table, the products table, and the suppliers. 3 entities. Go finish. So these are the 3 entities that we get. Let's compile. So now I want to expose my database, my Northwind tables, as APIs to the outside world. I need to create a controller for that. So let me add a controller. Add controller. Now this time I'm going to choose a different template. I'm going to choose this one here. The Web API 2 controller with actions using Entity Framework. Let's go add. the model class, I'm going to choose the product entity. The data context class, I will choose the Northwind entities context. And then let's click on add. So we get this controller. We get a products controller. And notice that in this products controller, it inherits from the API controller. Whereas regular controllers were just inheriting from the controller class. This is inheriting from the API controller class. Let's have a look at these. This is the get method that responds to the get verb. And this one, the name of this one is get products. And this get product returns one item. Now, because this is link and this is a lambda expression, we can actually add some lambda extensions to this. Like I can say order by, okay, p dot product name, for example. So now we get these action methods. We have the put product, which does the update. We have the post product that does an insert, and we have a delete product. The last one is dispose. It's actually for garbage collection. What else can we see here? We can see that in the comments, it specifies that the URL has to look like this. It has to be /API/products. Okay, where is this rule set? But for Web API, there's another file here called the Web API config, and in there are the rules that determine how APIs are served. And you can see that here it says API controller, and then there's an optional ID. Now that we've done this, let's compile and see if it's going to work. So I'm going to refresh this page, going to the root. Okay, and then I'm going to tag to this API/products. So we can see the products that we created. Now we do get an error here. And if we look closely at the error, it gives us a hint of what the heck is happening here. It says the object type failed to serialize. There is a problem with entity framework objects that are not serializable. We need to add some code to make them serializable. So I've got some snippets here. We need to take this code and put it at the bottom of the startup.cs file. So if I go, not the startup actually, it is the web config.cs file. So I'm going to take this code and put it here. The web API config, not the web.config, the web API config. So I'm going to put this code down here. And basically, what does this code tell us? It says that every object that is going to be served by the web API has to be serializable, and the output has to be returned as JSON objects. Okay? So now let's go back and check our page. If I come here and I refresh, and sure enough, we get our JSON objects. So you can see that my products table is being exposed now as an API. Let's look at something else. Let's look a little bit more in our controller. So we have products, get product. We have the put, which is the update, and we have the post. Now, there is a very useful tool that comes with Google Chrome, and it's called Postman. Postman as in the person who delivers your mail. And that tool is very, very useful when you come to inspect JSON traffic. If you want to install this tool, it is this tool that I'm talking about. You should actually go to the web store in Chrome and install that tool. How does it help us? I'll show you. Okay, what we can do here is inside of Postman, you can perhaps let us run this application again. We run the application just so that I can snag the URL. So this is the URL I'm interested in. So let's go into Postman and go to the API/products API. And you can see it returns for you the JSON objects. Let's say we want to add a product. You can do that through Postman. So if I want to add a product, products row. Okay. If I want to add a product, I have to send it a JSON object. So how do you send it a JSON object? If you look at the product itself, you need to send it a product name. So I can go product name, colon, and let me call it T, for example. Category, ID, and for the moment I'll just make it 2. Supplier ID, I'll make that 3. And the last thing maybe I want to enter is the unit price. And I'll make that 55. Now, as far as the header type is concerned, if I want to post the header type, I want it to be a JSON object. So I can set the content type here to be application/JSON, which is the format that I want to send it to. So I'm using post, I'm using API products as the URL, and I'm going to send body, and I'm going to send some raw data. Let me send this and see what's going to happen. What happened here? You can see it actually posted the data, it actually inserted it in the database. And I did this through Postman, not through a UI, as in an application. What it does, if you look at the code, the post method, let's look at the post method. What does it do here? It adds, okay, and then it returns the product. So that's what we got. We got a returned product. Okay. Now, let's go back to our application here. We just added a product with API. If you click on APIs here, you should see that in addition to account and values that we had before, this is the values, now we also have information about the products. So all the APIs that are being exposed, they are actually in this help file. Now this help file is proprietary really to ASP.NET. Now there is a standard out there, an international standard called Swagger. And Swagger provides a directory description of public services, because as we know, there are many services out there that are public. You can go to the websites of many cities and they provide you with APIs about their hotels, their hospitals, their parking lots, and so on and so forth. If we want to expose our data publicly, then it's a good idea to create what we call a Swagger description site. This is done quite easily in ASP.NET. So I'll show you how it's done. To enable documentation and a description of your service, the first thing you need to do is to enable documentation. For example, I will go into the properties of this project and click on the Build tab here and scroll down until I get to XML documentation file. This one here. The moment I enable it, it gives me the name of an XML file that's going to produce the documentation. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about C# documentation, which is equivalent to Javadoc in the Java world. Okay? So I'm going to copy this and park it in Notepad because I want to use it later on. I'm just going to park this here. Now, the other thing you need to know is that when I compile now, having enabled XML documentation, I get a lot of warnings. You'll get a ton of warnings here. And why am I getting so many warnings? Is because when you turn on documentation, Visual Studio reminds you that many of your classes, you haven't documented them properly. Because the documentation for C# is like the // Let's add some documentation to our product controller. So I'm going to go now to the product controller. Okay, and go home, and maybe I'll add some documentation right here. And the way to add documentation in C# is to enter 3 slashes. The moment you enter 3 slashes, you can enter documentation. So let me just say this API returns all products sorted by product name. Okay? And as far as the return type is concerned, you can enter it here. You can say that the return type is iQueryable product. I can stick that in here. Now, I have to write the proper HTML code for the less than and the greater than sign. So I'm going to replace this with LT semicolon and this one with ampersand GT semicolon. Now, to enable Swagger, we need to add some package manager commands. So there is this package manager command called install package swashbuckle. This swashbuckle is the NuGet package that we need to install. So I'm going to go down here into the package manager and paste this. So now this has been added. There's one more step we need to do. When we do install this swashbuckle, there is a file that gets added to our app start directory, and it's called the Swagger config file. The Swagger config file. Around line 100, there is some code that you have to enable. I have this over here that I'm going to copy and paste. Copy, and I'll paste this in line 101. Now, I had parked the name of an XML file in Notepad here. So I'm going to take this, close this, I don't need it anymore, and I'll paste that name right here. Okay. This is how you can enable Swagger. So let's find out. Up to now we haven't seen what's the benefit of Swagger. So let's find out. So I just compiled. I'm going to refresh my site here. And I'm going to add the word Swagger to the URL. And when you enter Swagger, what do you get? You get a site that gives you information about your services. These are the services. We've got an account service, we've got a product services, we've got a value services. If I click on the product services, notice this documentation. You remember? This is the documentation that I entered in the controller. So if you properly document your APIs, then the person who is going to use your APIs, they know how to use it. If I click on these buttons, these colored buttons, then I can test these APIs. I can click on Get here, and if I click on Try it out, it's going to go and get me down here. It's going to return the data. Let me try to play with post. When you do post, and if I want to try it out, it gives you an example here of the object that you need to ship to the server if you want to post, which means to add data. So I can pretty much take this, click on it, it gives you that information here. Maybe I'll enter another product name. Let us say Pop, okay? And supplier ID is 3, category ID is 5, sorry, here 5. And I'm not interested in this. Unit price, I'm going to say 880, that's too much. And then get rid of everything else. And hopefully I should be able to, I'll get rid of all the stuff I'm not interested. So if I say try it out, maybe I should remove this last comma here. Try it out. And then what comes back? What comes back is the product I entered. This is the response, which means I actually entered that data. Okay? What makes Swagger so cool? In my opinion, what makes Swagger so cool is this. If you go to their public site, and the public site for Swagger is swagger.io. This is their public site. And here you can get to know everything there is to know about Swagger. Another interesting site is to go to editor.swagger.io. Down here. What does this do? I'll show you. If you go to this site, you can use the service that you created to generate proxy files in order to interact with that service. I'll give you an example. Let's go here. Let's go back to our Swagger UI here. This is very important, this URL here. What does it do? If I take this URL, I copy it and paste it in a different tab, you will get a JSON file that describes your service. Now, humans are not expected to use this too much. The objective of this particular file is for the IDEs. If you point an IDE to this JSON file, that IDE can create for you the proxy files that enable you to talk to that service without coding anything. It gives you the classes. So I'll give you an example. So I'm going to take all of this. Let me say Control A, no, not this. Control A, Control C. And I will park this temporarily in Notepad. Okay? And get rid of these first two lines if they exist. We don't need them. Now, let's go to editor.swagger.io over here. Under File, there is this paste JSON. What I should do is take this JSON code, paste it here, and go import. This imports the definition of your service into Swagger, and the end result of this is that you can generate the proxy code for any one of these technologies. In other words, if you're writing an Android application and you want to talk to a JSON service out there, I'm sure you did this before. You wrote your own code. You wrote your own asynchronous code to go and talk to that data. So what you can do here is, if you get the Swagger JSON file, here you are. You can say, download for me the Android, and it's going to download for you the Android code. If you're doing PHP, it will give you the PHP code. So let's have a look at if it's going to generate for us the C# classes, the proxy classes. So here it is. It sent us a file called C# client generator. Let's look at the properties. One thing you should always do with files that come from the internet, always check that the file is not blocked. And if it's blocked, you have to unblock it. Otherwise, you get a lot of problems. So apply, OK, and now let's take this code, copy, and maybe I'll put it somewhere so we can have a look at what's in it. You get this README file with documentation on how to understand the, it opens here, but it gives you documentation how to use it. In fact, it even gives you an example file with a main method on how to create your proxy and how to use it. And this is true of all the other technologies. And, of course, you get the code. There's the test code and then the actual code that you would use. So if you incorporate this into your application, it'll work. Okay? So I I'm going to close everything. I'm going to continue modeling a health clinic scenario. And in the health clinic scenario, we're going to create the code first classes for these entities. Okay? We're going to have an ailment entity, a medication entity, and a patient entity. So a patient has an ailment, and for that ailment, the doctor writes medication. That's what we want to do. So, along those lines, what we're going to do is, I'm going to add a folder called clinic under models. Add folder, and let's call it clinic. And under here, I'll add a new class. In fact, the first class is going to be medication. The second one will be ailment. And then the third one will be patient. The code for these, let me close this. The code for these are actually pre-baked. I'm going to take this from here and put it for ailment. And resolve this. Close this. And the code for medication will be this. And I'll resolve this. And finally, the code for patient would be this. And I don't need to resolve anything here. Let me compile. Now, when you're doing code first development, you have your entities. The next step is to describe those entities to your context class. And we already have a context class here, which is the application DB context. We don't need to create another context class. So let's go here to the identity model. And down here, we have the application DB context class. So let us specify the entities that we want created in the database. So I have to resolve these. Let me resolve this first one. And I guess DB set also has to be resolved. And let me do the same for the other two entities. Patient. And one more. Ailment. Now, just so the name of the database is not unnecessarily long, I'm going to go into the web.config file and change the name so that it is short. So we go into the connection string, which is here, and I will change this to something pretty short. I'll call it clinic DB. And I need to do the same thing to the initial catalog. Okay. Now, because I'm going to do migrations, I'm going to create a folder here called docs so that I can put all my migration commands in them. I'll create a folder here called docs, and in that docs I'll add a text file. So I'll choose this text file and I'll call it migrations. Here is my migrations file, and I'm going to add this command to it that's going to enable for me a migration. Copy this here, and if you look at it, the context type name is application DB context. It's the only context we have, and I wanted to go into migrations clinic. So let me execute this file, this command, in the package manager console. Okay, so that's done, and we can see here that it created for us the configuration file, and there's a seed method here. I want to seed this with some data, but before I do that, let me add a migration. So I'll come back here and add a migration. I'll copy this into the text file, and the only thing I want to change here is the namespace for the configuration class that was created. So I'm going to copy the namespace from here and put it in here. So this is what it's going to look like. Add migration. The configuration class fully qualified name is the namespace plus the name of the class, and I'll call that initial create. So let's execute this. Copy and paste it in here. Okay, so at this point we have our migrations, and of course you can see here that we have two methods: the up that creates the tables in the database, and the down that can tear it down. And we will be creating three entities: ailments, medications, and patients. Now the next thing I want to do is create some dummy data. So I'm going to create a file in models, and I'm going to call it simply dummy data. And in this dummy data, I've got some code for that. Here's my dummy data class. It's going to have these methods. So in this class, I want to add these methods, and let me just make them look nice and resolve some of these namespaces. That's for medication, and some sample data for ailments. Be down here. Okay, and then some dummy data for patients. Okay, so if you have a look at this, I'm creating medicines, 5 types of medicines: Tylenol, aspirin, Advil, Robaxin, and Voltaren. Okay, and ailments, we've got headache, tummy pain, flu, cold. And these are the 3 patients that we have. We have Jim Jones, and as far as ailments are concerned, he takes the first 2 ailments, which is headache, the first 2 Yeah, he's got the first two ailments, which is headache and tummy pain. The medications he takes are the first two medications, which is Tylenol and aspirin. Okay? And we're just creating some dummy data here. Now that we have dummy data, let us populate the seed method in the configuration class. So if we go now to the configuration class, I have this method here that I can use to seed my database. So I'll go back to my dummy data here, and I have this seed method that I'm going to copy and paste instead of this. And this is not the right namespace. I'm going to change this to application DB context. DB context. So this is my context class. And now this should compile. The last step now to create data is to call the update database command in the package manager. So I can basically do this. I'll go down here in my migrations file. I can copy this, and I know what to do. I'll just copy this and paste this. And the command I want is update database. With this configuration file. If I do this, I believe I'll have my data. So let's go to our package manager console right here. Paste. At this point, the seed method is completed, and we can expect that we have a database. Now, to be able to see my database, I can click on this thing here, which will show me all the hidden files. So I'll click on all the hidden files, and here's my clinic DB. I'm going to include it in the project, and then I can turn off hidden files. Let me open the clinic DB, and I should be able to see the tables. And in here are my ailments. And sure enough, my ailments, my medication, my patients are in there. Now that we have our entities, let us create our API controllers for this. So I'm going to come here and say add controller, and I will choose this web API controller with actions using entity framework again. And this time I want to model the patient entity. So I'm going to type in patient, and it will find that, but I'm not using the Northwind entities. I'm using the application DB context. That's my entry point. So let me click on add. Okay, so let's compile. If I run this, and I want to go to see my patients, I would have to enter API/patients. And you can see now I've got 3 patients. We've got their names, but we don't see their ailments, we don't see their medications. Why is that? I'd like to see what their medications are. The answer to that is this. If you go to the controller that was created, this is called lazy loading. Entity framework only gives you the data that you asked for. If you didn't ask for the related entities, it's not going to bother to do that. If you want the related entities, this is what you need to do. You need to say include for me those related entities. So I can say include here ailments. I want you to include the ailments, and I also want you to include P dot medications. And by the way, this path was not intended. I intended just a simple P. Okay? So now let's compile. And let's see what it's going to give us. If we come here, after it's compiled and refresh this, there you go. So we know now that Ann Smith has a cold and the medication is aspirin. And Jim has flu, medication is Advil. And so on and so forth. So it gives you the medication and the ailments too. One of the problems with Web API and RESTful services is you don't have the ability to filter data the way you want it on the server. If ever you want to filter data, let's say I want only those people who have colds, right? To serve such as a request, you have to bring all the data to the client side. It could be an Android app, an iOS app, or an Angular app, and you would have to do the filtering on the client side, which at times that is inefficient. Now, there is a way around it where if the programmer recognizes that there is a specific type of a request that happens over and over again, they can, if they want to, create an action method that serves that particular request. One possible request is, let us say, if I want to know patient 2, for example. If I want to know patient 2, I can get patient 2. But if I want to know patient 2's medication, this is a very logical kind of request. I'm only interested in patient 2's medication. But can the API provide me with that? Not unless the programmer writes some code for that. There are two problems. One is that the rule only caters for 3 components to the address. Now this one is not in the rule. But there's a way of overriding that rule. And that could be done as follows. Let's copy this and put it into our patient controller. I'll add it right here. Now, what is this saying? This is saying that we have a new routing. And this routing, it follows this signature. The signature of this routing is that it's API followed by patient, followed by an optional ID, followed by medication. If that kind of routing comes into the controller, it's going to be served by this. And this essentially just goes, finds that patient, and returns only the medication for that patient. Okay? So let's try that out. I can go now here and say patient 2, give me only the medication for patient 2. And that would be Jim Jones. Oops, we have a problem. So I think I made a typo somewhere. Patient. Maybe this I should make it patients. Okay? I think that's the problem. The signature didn't match. So let's come back here and refresh this. Okay? So now we know that patient 2 takes Advil and takes 3 doses of Advil. Okay? Something we can look at in the controller are things like this. If a patient is not found, it will return a not found action result. And a not found action result is simply a 404. Okay? So as much as possible, it returns the appropriate status, HTTP status code for whatever is going on. If it found something, it will return an OK status code, which is 200. A bad request, I believe, is a 403. And so on and so forth. This is what I needed to cover today. Thank you very much.